This is Abe Nadimi, and welcome to the Positively Offensive Podcast. Welcome to the Positively Offensive Podcast. After 5 location hops, a total failure, we're ready to get going. I am really blessed to have Emily, one of my close friends from Austin, visiting Dallas.
Thank you very much for having me.
And get to hear her story and her contribution to freelance and in the Austin community. So thank you, Emily, for your patience today as we're working through this startup, in a sense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I'd like to start off with your story. What do you how do you answer that story? Like, who's Emily and what's your story?
I don't know if I have the answer to that necessarily. Interestingly enough, though, just a few months ago, we had, I think she calls herself a visual artist. So you're telling a story. And while you're telling the story, she's drawing it out on a great big piece of paper. And so we did that. And I mean, that story was very specific. How did you get from wherever you were 25 years ago to where you are now, running the freelance conference and having all the little pieces in between. So I told that great big long story. Just sitting here thinking maybe a shorter version of that is who is Emily Leach right now is probably not a whole lot different than a lot of people that are in their middle to late 40s, maybe even early 50s. And, the world is changing faster than I think we've ever known it to change. I mean, it's always changed, but I think it was a much slower pace. And we look at the millennials and all the things that they have had to adjust to so quickly, and we've had to adjust to them too in a different era. And so I think I'm a human, figuring that kind of stuff out, where I sit in that. And it has made me look at life probably through a new lens and really verify if I am who I always thought I was. I had a recent death in the family, father dying, and that can make you really just kind of reanalyze who you are. And so that's why it's kind of a tough question right now of who am I, other than a person on a journey.
So I know you call yourself genetically unemployable.
I do.
Which is wonderful, because I know there is some branding exercise to get to your two words. And I don't know if you knew that at the time or you just did it. So that is kind of your 2 words, and it means so much, right?
Okay.
And I remember hearing that, and it's like there's a whole story in those 2 words. Like I totally get it, right? Genetically unemployable, no matter what, there's no way that you can do that, right? And so that led you down the path in which of course, you were freelancer and you are freelancer, and now you're running the conference, which I definitely want to hear about. So what in your upbringing led you to support that moment where you're like, I can't do this. I cannot have the corporate job?
I don't think it was anything in my upbringing. If it was, I haven't pinpointed what that is. Because I was definitely raised in a family where you have mom and dad. Dad had the job for 30 years. Mom stayed at home and raised the 3 kids. We've made jokes as kids that we were raised in the Cleaver house.
Okay.
And had a very strict religious upbringing, so on and so forth, right? So we lived that very kind of squarish life. And so I think all 3 of us, to some degree, kids, have spent most of our adult life just trying to figure out who we are outside of those boxes. And probably me even more than my 2 older siblings. So I went through high school, I went to college, and I got about 2 years into college. And looking back, I could see what it was, but at the time I didn't. I'm not doing this anymore. This is not, I do not want to spend my life sitting inside a room and listening to people lecture to me. And so I went ahead and got my associates in engineering design and moved to my dream job in Houston, Texas. And I had always wanted to live in Houston. As a kid, we'd drive through going to my grandparents' house. And as a kid, it's just big buildings that look gorgeous and amazing and full of life. And I did it. And about 2 years in, it wasn't what I thought it was. And call it naivety, call it kismet. I don't know what you want to name it, but I just woke up one Tuesday morning and said, I don't want to do this. And maybe it was because I was the youngest of 3, or I'm sure a psychologist could have all kinds of fun with this. But so I didn't. I quit that day. And I wanted to live in a town that had a super cool name. So on Saturday, I lived in Albuquerque.
That's right. Right. And from Albuquerque, you stayed for many, many years.
I spent 20 years away from Texas total, 15 of those in Albuquerque, yeah.
Where were the other 5?
I lived in Colorado, I lived in Montana, I lived in Washington, spent a fair amount of time in California and Arizona. Sorry,
That's awesome.
There was another one.
So when you went to Albuquerque, okay, so you quit your job. What did you fall back on? What did you do after that? Immediately, right? Did you after that? What did you do after that as far as like making income?
Well, I woke up on Sunday morning and realized that the check wasn't going to come that Thursday. Got me up and was like, I didn't really think this through, did I? And I was a single mom, and I didn't know what else to do. I picked up the Yellow Pages. For those of you guys that don't know what that is, it was a book about this big, and it was yellow, and it had businesses in it. Anyway, joking all aside, I just started in the A's and started calling engineering companies and told them, this is what I do. Do you need any help? This is what I do. Do you need any help? And I got to the B's, and interestingly enough, the New Mexico Department of Transportation, as well as the federal government, had made a huge change in their software, what they needed everything to be drawn in, and I was a computer drafting person, and the software that I had been taught in Houston hadn't really, it wasn't like AutoCAD. I mean, you probably know what AutoCAD is. You don't have to be a designer to kind of at least understand or know what AutoCAD was. So what I used was MicroStation, and Intergraph is what it was called back then. And if you didn't have an Intergraph operator in your office, you couldn't get DOT or DOE contracts. And they didn't have one. And it would be a room not much smaller than this. I mean, the machines were huge back then. And so the guy on the phone, I still remember this, he goes, so you know how to run an Intergraph station? And in my head, I'm going, what else is there? I don't understand the question, right? Come on in. So I went in, and they literally brought me into a room kind of like this. Even had the glass doors. Opened it, turned the light on. You know, there's the machine way over there, and they again, you know how to operate that. Again, well, yes, what else is there? And so I was sort of their king to the kingdom at that point. And it turned out that they weren't the only one. And so I had a contract gig with this one, I had a contract gig with that one, and so I didn't set out to be a freelancer.
Right. So they didn't offer you a job, or did they offer you a job and you say, no, I don't want a job. I want to.
They didn't offer a job because at that point in time, they didn't have enough contract. They didn't have enough work,
Sure.
in their contract to justify a job. They didn't know me from, Sam. And so it really took the route that it took. And it allowed me to continue to be that somewhat stay-at-home mom. I mean, I worked in the office and then I worked at home some too, but that's when I bought my first real computer with 8 megs of RAM.
8 megs of RAM. That's awesome. So I didn't know, I didn't know that part of the story.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know that part. So this is really, so I know some of your story, and I know then you end up working, and I remember you called a really big name company and you said, hey, and I remember the story, and we'll get to that one in a second. So I knew that part and how you end up doing SEO and so forth.
Yeah, I kind of migrated through a couple of different careers, yes.
Right, because I think that's really interesting, because I do work with freelancers or small businesses, and kind of learning how they got started to me has always been so important, because it allows me to understand where they are today and how they got here. It's not an isolated moment in time. Right. To me, it's not like whatever problem you have is right here. It's like, well, how did you even get here? Right, it allows me to understand some forks in the road, what their thinking was. So I caught as you were telling your story right now, and I said, I don't remember her saying I had a backup plan, and then you said, I didn't, I just quit.
And I don't do backup plans very well.
And you said I was a single mom, you said that, right? Mm-hmm. So I was a single mom and I just quit. And then, so that's epic. Like, I did not know that part of your story. And so then you all of a sudden start having gigs, and that just became
what I did.
That's awesome. So how did you get into SEO? Because I think that's a really interesting story. And to me, that's like a complete black arts thing, right? So I'll definitely love for you to describe that process a little bit. And then those phone calls that you made to those big name companies, and you're like, hey, how does this work? And what are you looking for? Do I need to cue you on the name of that one?
I don't think so. But how I got from being a computer-aided drafter,
right,
engineering designer is what we always called it, to being a SEO. It's funny. It's like at the time and looking back, you'll see that it does flow, but it doesn't automatically flow. So there was a point in time which the servers, the software that I was using for computer-aided drafting, went from client side, meaning it just sat on the computer, to server side, which meaning it's set from the computer. I mean, the server and the computer pull off of it, right? And back then, there wasn't a whole lot of software that ran on servers. Not like today. Everything runs on the server, and you may have a little bit of pieces, right, that sit on the client side. Back then, that's not how it worked. All servers did back then was they held files and they managed printers.
That's right.
They attempted to manage printers. And so this was kind of one of the first. And so the network people at the time, at the company I was working at, that wanted to do the migration didn't really understand what was going on my end. And it turns out that I sort of had this natural knack for computers. I just sort of understand them. So I began to learn the server side. So I did that first migration, and then I began doing them for other engineering firms. And so I migrated into network engineering.
No way.
So I started going to engineering companies and migrating them over into a server-side platform for Microsoft
Incredible.
Intergraph. Yeah, so I did that for a couple of years, and then that migrated into doing network engineering or network admin, doing installs and so on and so forth for all kinds of companies. And I ended up at a furniture store in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Okay. It's called Tima. It's like the furniture store. It's a cute little quaint Scandinavian furniture store. And they hired me on. We migrated over all their servers and stuff just off of one platform to another, but regardless. And then when all that was done, I was managing the servers and all the nodes or the client stations. And their director of sales quit. And so we're all sitting around a table, and they literally look down the table and they go, "You know how to run computers. You take it over." And so we brought in a web designer, and she told me about this concept of getting your site to show up higher on these search engine things. And there was this kind of new one coming on that we don't think is really going to do much, but maybe we need to pay attention to it. I thought it had a silly name. Turns out Google is going to make it, I think. But back then, you literally called them. And
see, this is the part of the story I was like, you did what?
You called up Google and you said, "Hey, this is my page," and whoever answered went through it, and this is my keyword phrase, and they would tell you do this or do that,
so funny.
And push it through, and it was a different time, and we didn't have a name for it. It wasn't SEO. It was take your site and try to make it position better on the search engine. That's what it was called.
So this is like 1998, 99, am I right?
1991.
1991, okay, there you go.
Yeah, it was really early.
That's right. But then okay, that's incredible. So yeah, I'm just so impressed that you stayed out of, you just stayed in the freelance world for so long.
I would every
what
once
kept
in a while
you out of it, right? Like I'm sure there was an opportunity, and sure somebody was like, "Hey, can you just come on board full time?" Am I right?
And some people did, and sometimes I took them.
Okay.
And then it would last, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months, sometimes as much as a year. And I would just, oh man, I didn't know. I just knew that it was really uncomfortable. So what I would do is I'd go in and I'd find the issues for the most part, and I'd attempt to fix them. And it turns out they didn't really want them fixed most of the time. That was their culture. And to me, it felt broken, so I wanted to fix it. And it turns out that's just not what they want. And so I would end up quitting, and then I'd go back to freelance work because I wanted my freedom. So then I got sort of involved in internet marketing through all my SEO stuff, and started going to some of the events with StomperNet and a couple of other things. And that's when I was given the name Genetically Unemployable.
Oh, somebody gave it to you?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was the very beginning of smartphones.
Okay.
And I remember, my little smartphone. And we were like, wow, that's super cool. I mean, it was like, I just got it. And everybody, there was 4 or 5 of us. And someone else looked at me as if I had heard it before. And they said, "Do you have that URL yet?" And I'm like, yes. I bought it. The first thing maybe I ever bought on a cell phone was that domain.
Epic. So you said freedom. I wanted my freedom. Is it that you want your freedom, or you were more interested in being able to go into a challenging situation, solve the problem, and not get into the BS of the politics inside of the office and whatnot? And so you're like, well, I just want to keep on hopping from problem to problem, in a sense.
And to me, those are one and the same.
Okay.
I wanted the freedom to be able to live my life the way I wanted to live my life. And if that was hopping from issue to issue and fixing it, if that was taking a month off and spending time with my son, or, because a lot of times I'd take the entire summer off.
Okay.
And my son and my boyfriend at the time had 2 kids. And so I would kind of help take care of the kid, So it allowed me the ability to live the life that I wanted to live. And over time, that life just kind of it changed, it morphed. I got to live on a sailboat part-time for a few years, and
wow, okay.
I've gotten to live in Montana, and I've gotten to do all kinds of really cool stuff that I probably wouldn't have been able to do as a single mom. It allowed me to be a single stay-at-home mom, because I got to the point where I was working from home and not working in client offices anymore. So it gave me that freedom to do what I wanted and needed to do.
If you had to put a price on that freedom, I know it's a really weird question, right?
Okay.
But because I think I tell people the same things. Like, I think being able to leave and go to an event on my daughter's school, like, there's a value to that. Like, there's something that I get from that in a job situation I couldn't necessarily do. So I just can't compare just numbers. I can't just say, well, I'm making this much, or I made this much, and I could have made this much in a job. But there's all of these other benefits that I got, right?
Well, you can look at it the other way too. I'm making this in a job, and I can make this as a freelancer and not have to spend nearly as much time.
So you did, one second, you did the higher hand for the freelancer.
Yeah.
So that actually brings to a question I was going to ask you about. I know you speak a lot about freelancers understanding a business.
Right, I do.
Right? And is that what was the underlying reason for you to decide, I want to hold a conference? Was that one of them? Is that the reason?
It really wasn't. The reason was I had started the group on Facebook. So I started a group, it's called Austin Freelance Gigs, for people in Austin connecting freelancers to work. And it just worked really well. Because I'm sure you've heard it. People will say, I'm looking for a web designer. I'm looking for, who do I use? And,
right.
And it's so funny. I can know 20 of them. And you can ask me that. And I go, deer in headlights. And so I was like, why don't we just bring them all together in one spot and get them to know each other? And it was beautiful. I loved what happened in there was somebody would post that they needed a web designer. Just stick with that analogy or example. And then me, 3 or 4 other people, or maybe not even me at all, would say, oh, use this person, or here's my portfolio. I'd like to help you out. And that whole conversation would start. That migrated into freelancers just asking super awesome questions, kind of being vulnerable, because they had a safe place. So we didn't allow any sales. We don't allow any free projects. It was all about getting freelancers more paid work. And so taking out all of the noise allowed freelancers to have a safe space that they could ask questions and be vulnerable. And they did. And then other freelancers would come into, oh, I did it like this, or talk to this person. He or she just did exactly what you're talking about, and connect those people and tag each other. And so, wow, I want to do this in person. I want this to happen. I want to go do this with my peers. And so as I tell the story, I always, because to me this is a big pivotal point, is I got up out of my chair, walked across the room, got my credit card, sat down to find me a conference for freelancers. And it didn't exist.
Right, for you to be an attendee.
Yeah.
Right.
I just wanted to go do that. I didn't sit down with the expectation, I'm going to start a conference tonight. And at that point in my life, I had 5 years of helping put on, TEDx ABQ, TEDx Corpus Christi. I was the founder of that, co-founder of TEDx ABQ. So and having built those up to be fairly large events, I knew how to do that part. I wasn't scared of the grassroots process, and I wasn't scared of being a freelancer. I'd done it, it felt like forever. And so I was like, how hard could this be? We'll just do it here.
Famous last words.
The answer is hard. And sometimes the answer is harder than that. And that night I got on to where else but GoDaddy. And started looking up domain names, and there was this one called Freelance Conference. And it's like, that's a good name for a freelance conference. So I bought it, sat down. I was a web designer, so I sat down and started building out a site. I just picked a date, and by that morning, we basically had a conference. Didn't have a space yet. I went and found a space, but that didn't take too long.
So you sat down like, hey, I want to go attend a conference.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I really want to make sure I get this right. She said, hey, I want to go find a conference with other freelancers. I get my credit card. I'm going to go sit down. From that moment, how long before you said, wow, there is no conference, I'm just going to go host a conference? How many days, weeks, hours?
45 minutes.
Wow. And so when did you buy the domain name and then say, I'm going to host a conference?
That night.
Wow.
I mean, I literally sat there and I did the research.
When did you pick the day?
That night. I mean, I built the site out that night. It had everything just about in it except for a location, because that I couldn't do that night.
So you decided that night, I'm going to hold the conference.
Yeah.
You bought a, yeah, well, that's what I do because I'm badass. This is, by the way, that's a little conference sticker, which we'll throw up a better photo of. That you probably, you're like, hey, I'm going to have stickers. And then you just did that too. So that is really epic, because myself and everybody else, the rest of the population of individuals will add so much time to our decisions. So what audacious, like what is going, I don't even know how to ask the question. Like, why do you do that? How are you not scared of, I got to make sure I know what I'm doing, or know where I'm going to be, or any of these things?
Maybe it's a personality trait.
But is that what you do in everything? Is that kind of how you've seen yourself, that if you decide right now, like, I mean, rowing, how did you just decide I'm going to get into that? Was that a process where you're like, let me research it. Do I need to go? Or do you say, I'm going to get a rowing, and you just went down, find a place, put your credit card down and get into it?
Yeah, I just saw somebody doing it. It's like, I want to do that.
From that moment to how many days or weeks or hours until you were in the rowing class?
Well, that one did take a few weeks, mainly because when I first saw someone rowing, I lived in Albuquerque and hadn't yet moved to Austin.
Okay, sure.
And so then when I moved to Austin, just the process of getting into Austin and doing, so I moved to Austin on May 7th, and I believe I was rowing by the end of June.
That's so awesome.
I really enjoyed it. I loved having the feeling of the waters right there, and for me, it's absolute serenity. And there's not many things in the world that do that for me. The way my brain works, it's just constantly going. And for the most part, it doesn't really dawn on me to stop and think it through. Now, my boyfriend is very much a let's stop and think things through, and so I've learned in a lot of cases to stop and kind of think things through. But when it comes to my company still with the freelance conference, I still hold fairly true to if I really feel it, if I can tell that this is a good idea. I mean, it is intuition. Doesn't mean I'm not wrong sometimes, but I feel like I have a pretty good intuition, and I follow it. I don't doubt it. One of the speakers that's coming this year, we were talking one time, and I loved this concept. We were talking about that gut reaction. Your gut's telling you to do something or not to do something, and people say, listen to your gut, screw your gut, whatever. But she was talking about how intuition isn't a figment of our imagination.
Right.
Intuition is the makeup of all of these experiences and things that you've learned, conscious and subconscious, and that gut, that intuition is that. And I think she even went as far as, if you believe that you have lives even behind you that you've lived, she says, is it possible to even have the wisdom from those? So that was a question, but still it's like, I found that really interesting, and it just gave me that much more excitement and belief in my gut feelings, my intuition.
That's fun. There's a documentary then, it's called Inside, I think, which is, I think, a Scandinavian term, but it's related to intuition and how important that is. And so I watched that, and then unrelated, I watched a documentary about kind of like the digestive system, but also the fact that there's neurons inside of your gut. So you have enough neurons in your gut that's connected to your brain via I forgot the name of the nerve. It doesn't matter, I guess, at this point. And so that the cortex of a German Shepherd, right? That amount of neurons you have in your gut, which is pretty phenomenal because it's a super smart animal, right? Yeah. So you actually have that in here. So that gut feeling, they're thinking like that's part of your brain. Your brain is in here, and they communicate with each other. But we kind of, like you said, like you're going after that, listening to that, and in the Scandinavian thing, they're paying attention to that.
Interesting.
So yeah, it is really interesting because so many times it's like, no, it has to come from here. Yeah, I got feelings, but let me rationalize them and all those other things, and it's not. It shouldn't be just that, I guess, right? So I thought that was really interesting.
I think so. I mean, I can't tell you how many decisions I've made. My sailboat, for one. I remember waking up, it was January 24th. My birthday is on February 23rd, and that was going to be my 40th birthday that particular year. And I was like, you know what? I do. I just finished the book, Salty Piece of Land by Jimmy Buffett. I finished it the year before, but if you read that book, it's more than just the $24 that you're going to spend on the book. I'm just saying. And so I woke up and I said, you know what? If I can find a sailboat that is 30-ish, 24 to 30 feet, and it is parked somewhere in the Corpus Christi or Aransas Pass, Rockport, in that area where my family lived. I can pay cash for it. I had these requirements that I at least thought through. I'm going to buy myself a sailboat. By the end of that day, I owned a sailboat to be picked up on my birthday on February 23rd.
That's awesome.
I hired somebody in Corpus to go take a look at it to make sure that it was sound and, all that.
So I think sometimes, obviously, people become freelancers because they're like, hey, I want to be a freelancer, right? And so they go off and they do something like what you're doing. And I mean, something that you do where you just like, I'm just going to go do it. And then they, as you say, they lack the business sense, right? So they didn't educate themselves enough ahead of time. So it's almost this, how do you educate yourself so that you can make those, when you make that decision that I'm going to run a conference, I'm going to go buy a sailboat, you actually succeed in doing so. You don't just go buy, hey, I'm going to run a conference and then tank it, right? Because now you're going on your third year, right? And or you had a sailboat and you didn't die out there in the water somewhere.
And I never sank it, not once.
And you never sank it. So how are you different in that sense, where you go to make that decision? It is very quick and very decisive, yet you do a lot of somehow prep work maybe to get to that decision, or after you make the decision, there's all of this work I need to do and commit to so that I can make this journey successful. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I keep going back to, I really believe that a lot of it has to do with personality. And it's hard to determine, right, how much of our personality is learned versus what we're born with. In fact, I've always actually been extremely curious about that, to the point of, so I had a child at 16, and I did give her up for adoption. And so we've reconnected since. And it's been really interesting in conversations with her to see how much of my personality I see in her that I know she didn't get because she didn't know me growing up.
Sure.
That was biological. So I believe that there is a lot of our personality that's biological. And the last few years I got to spend a lot more time with my dad, I can see that he made decisions that way. I didn't see it when I was younger. That's not what you see in your parents typically. But as an adult, getting to watch the way my father operated, there was a lot of, this is what I want to do, need to do, whatever, and just do it. And there wasn't a whole lot of this, let's evaluate, let's make spreadsheets, let's figure it out. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the way that he worked. And I think that I got that biologically. And I'm not afraid of the learning curve. Now, there's been some lessons learned over the years, so I can have a tendency to take on too much. I didn't notice or didn't understand my boundaries. So that was probably my biggest lesson learned, is that I have boundaries. I can't do it all physically, and learning how to say no. And we see it a lot on Facebook. You've heard it probably your whole life, and like going, yeah, people need to learn how to say no. That I was one of those people.
You're right.
Yeah. I thought it was all the other people, but it was me too.
So was the other people.
And because a lot of times when something didn't work out or it became really, really difficult, it was because maybe I was too far outside of my comfort zone or too far outside of what my natural tendencies were to be able to pick that up. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for freelancers to learn. Yes, you're right. I harp about business. But if freelancing is what you want to do, you need to really, really, really begin to know yourself. So I know that I'm a super fast study. I know that I don't have a problem hitting the ground running. And with few exceptions, there's very, very few things that I won't take on just because I don't know how to do them. If I don't take something on now, it's almost always because I understand my boundaries, my bandwidth limitations, and I want the conference, again, in this very moment in time, I want the freelance conference to be not just successful. I want it to kick ass. I want freelancers to have a place to go every year. I want them to know that they have a conference completely dedicated to their business, to legitimize what we do as freelancers, the industry that we all sit in, and validate that they need to learn and know and continue to brush up on their business skills as much, if not more, than every other type of business. It's not just startups. It's not just, corporate people. We're there too.
Right. So what have you learned on this like feast or famine thing that happens to freelancers? So either they have no business, or they're successful. So is freelancing something that happens? So here's kind of like, I guess, the question. So you start off as a freelancer, right? Let's say I make websites.
Okay.
Staying with that example. So I'm a website designer, and I got too much business. Is it the price needs to increase? Do I need to hire people? And then am I really still a freelancer? Or am I now a small business owner? And where's the distinction between those two? And is it okay to move in and out of those as the business grows, and then the interest in website maybe like, I don't really want to do websites anymore. I want to go this way, and I can kind of start over again?
All right. Let's see if I can touch on all those.
Right. So are we always a freelancer when we're in famine? But as we become really successful, we go from being a successful freelancer to now a small business owner, and then I own an agency. Or so what is that progression that you've seen, or what do you think that is now?
Well, I've seen it all, to be perfectly honest. So being in famine isn't the thing that makes you the freelancer, right? The freelancer is that you are an individual with a skill for hire by project, by hour, that isn't dedicated full-time to any one employer or client. Because as soon as you're dedicated full-time to one client or employer, you're really an employee, whether you're there yet or not. So regardless. So no judgment, but that's basically the outline of being a freelancer. And a freelancer is a small business, although I tend to refer to them as solopreneurs or micro businesses.
Right.
To me, a small business is probably going to have 4 or 5 employees, or they're just going to have employees. So let's go back to your example of a web designer. If you're struggling, there's usually one of 2 or 3 things that's going on. Maybe you haven't really brushed up your sales skills, your marketing skills, you haven't built any strategic partnerships so that people are feeding you work. You haven't really identified what your niche is, so people don't really know what to give you work for, because and this happens a lot in the graphic design web. I do web design, I do copy, I do graphic design, I do logos, I do, blah, 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 blah. So people are like going, but I don't know what you're good at. And so it can be valuable. It doesn't mean that you can't do and you aren't at least somewhat good at the others, but what is that one thing so people know that every time I hear that you need a WordPress design, I know to send it to this person. So it's usually something around there that's keeping you in the famine space. Longer conversation, but we're just going to leave it there.
Right.
And as you progress, if you will, to where you've got more client work coming in, it's steadier, and everything is moving along nicely, and you're comfortable right now. Now is the best time as a freelancer for you to begin to look at your efficiencies, your productivity. How are you using your time? Are you really charging enough? Are you getting a whole lot of work because you're not charging enough? What is that? So right then is the time in which you probably want to go ahead and make a little bit of shift in your price point. Go ahead and shift it up a little bit and really begin to look at your efficiencies. How are you doing things? Might be a good time to play with the idea of bringing on some part-time freelance help if you want to go down the road of being an agency. Some don't. I call them a freelance agency. So I can be a freelancer and have 2 or 3 freelancers working for me.
Sure.
I call that a freelance agency. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with the other way either. So typically freelancers that don't want to go down the route of what I call a freelance agency, and they want to do it on their own, and that's just, I call it a lifestyle business. And for the most part, that's what I've ran. I didn't want to manage people. I didn't want to put up with their crap or their not crap. I just didn't want to, right? And I didn't want to have to bring in enough work to be responsible for their income, even though they're freelancers, right? It's just how I felt. I wanted a freelance business, and that's the way I operated up until actually really probably the conference. And so in a freelance business, what you're looking for is, what is that price point that allows me to live the life that I want to live? How much work do I need to bring in to cover that nut? And how many hours a day or a week do I want to work? And then you have to find that balance between those. And then you have to find it inside for you. When we say the word balance, a friend of mine just wrote a book, Balance is Bullshit, and I believe it to some degree, but I think there is a balance that can be found, or harmony is probably a better word, that can be found in the majority of your life. So like right now, even though the conference is really picking up and there's a whole lot going on, the stress is starting to build up just a little bit, I decided to do this round differently. We'll see how long it sticks, but I'm doing my best. And that is, so I took rowing back up. You know, we were talking about that at lunch, right? And I did it for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to start just kind of getting back into shape. I've sort of gotten away from it the last couple of years, working so hard on the conference. And 2, I knew that I was going to need to find something that I utterly loved doing, because self-care is not innate for me. It is definitely a learned skill.
Really? Okay.
And
interesting.
I almost have to write myself notes and stuff. I put it in my calendar to remind myself to go do things. And so I needed it to be something that I loved so much that I would be willing to give up working on the conference for an hour or 2 to go do it.
No wonder you were laughing at me when I was telling you. So you asked the question at lunch, like, how do you see me, right? And I talked about, well, this individual that takes time for caring herself, and you're like interesting. And I know why.
Very interesting.
It's not innate for you.
It is not. It is actually quite difficult for me to do.
Really? That's awesome. It's a great question to ask then, because now you see how at least I perceived you to be.
I've done a great job on Facebook.
Yeah, you have, by the way. Because I'm always like, man, I should do that. Like, I should be that person. You do work and then take some time to go do something I want to do.
And that's kind of how I'm living my life right now. And not every day. I can't do it every day.
Sure. Okay,
right? So
that's fine.
like today, I came to Dallas. So I did not have time to get up and go row or ride my bike or even get to the gym and get on the road in time to make it here to do my day. And I won't get home till, let's just say 10 or 11 tonight, right? And so today it's not going to happen. But I realized that 2 days ago. And so I made sure I rode Monday night. I rode my bike Monday morning, and then I rode yesterday morning, and then I took last night off and I worked.
I love it. You're so action-oriented. That's so great. No, that's really great. So let's talk about money. Freelancers, that's how you get rich, right? And what lessons do you have for freelancers that are not rich yet?
You know what? I've never been a huge fan of the word rich, to be perfectly honest, because it's so subjective.
Okay.
What rich to you is not rich to me, and vice versa, quite possibly.
Possibly. Okay, that makes sense.
And there can be a whole lot of self-denial, and I'm perfectly rich, even though I'm completely poor because I'm happy. All of that, again, no judgment. It is whatever you want it to be. So, I mean, I know what you mean by it. So basically, I'm going to answer the question: if you're a freelancer that's not yet making the money that you want to make, then you dive in and find out why. There is a reason why. If it's because you just haven't learned the business skills yet to run your business and make it easier, if you're spending a lot of time doing busy work instead of doing client work, if you're not billing out, if you're not billing out enough, if you don't even know what your charge rate should be, all of that stuff. If you don't know how to market and you don't want to learn how to market, that's okay too. It really is. That means that you have a different route you need to take. It's strategic partnerships. It's going to agencies and working underneath their label, things like that. There's ways around all of it. You look at software developers that are freelancers. A lot of those guys, girls, humans, they're not, I'm going to go out and sell my products or services. They're just not. So they go and they usually find one or two companies that piecemeal out work or need people for long projects, and that's how they work. Absolutely nothing whatsoever wrong with that. You're making money and you're living the life that you want to live. Zero judgment.
Okay, so you said strategic partner a few times today.
I think it's a big deal.
In this interview, you actually said it a few times. So
okay.
Describe that. So I actually wrote strategic partner rather than hired gun. That's kind of when I wrote it, and I thought that there's something more to being a strategic partner, right, than just this one-time or two-time transaction. That's probably really good for a freelancer to.
Right, and depending on the type of strategic partner, may depend on how many of them you need. So what I got to pretty quickly in my freelance career was finding a half a dozen people that farmed out or needed help with SEO or website design, whatever it was I was doing. And so, for instance, I had one guy, totally wouldn't have thought this. I had a photographer that he did a lot of large projects, like people that would renovate houses. I mean, from the ground up, renovate houses, and then he would come in and photograph the entire thing. Well, it turned out that almost a large amount of his clients would then need a website to portray this beautiful photography that they just paid, good money for.
Right.
He wasn't a web designer, but he wanted to be able to say, I can take care of that for you. And so every time that would happen, he'd say, this is the project. And I'd look at it, okay, here's, and if he already had a pre-designed budget, he would say, can you do it for this? And I'd say yes or no, right? And then I found other web designers because they have overflow sometimes, and vice versa. So we had some strategic relationships, or a web developer. So there's a difference between a designer and developer. Designers aren't always developers, and vice versa. I might need some coding done, so I could just piecemeal out that coding. I can still get my job done, and pay him or her their rate, and kind of keep going. And let me see, what were some others? So basically, what you're looking for is other companies. They could be freelancers because they're a company, right? Okay.
Sure. Exactly why we talked about that.
Exactly. Other larger companies, there's that have piecemeal work or have ongoing, longer projects that maybe they need. Let's go to graphic design. Maybe they need a graphic designer 3 hours a week. And they're not going to bring someone on as an employee for that. You can fit that bill. Maybe it's 5 hours a week. Maybe it's 10 hours a week. But you're still a freelancer.
So you rattled off some amazing points right there. You're talking about strategic partner and billing and invoicing and all this stuff. So for the sake of you being able to get home at a reasonable time tonight, I want to dive into just the sales part. Okay. So the networking and sales, because I know in freelancing, there's, if you're in a co-working space, you're meeting a bunch of people, or you go to networking events, you're like, I got to get the word out. So what is your thoughts about effective networking? And then also sales for dummies would probably be a sales 101, because a lot of people are like, I'm not good at sales. And I think the funniest things is the people that say that they'll spend all afternoon convincing you, i.e. selling you, on why they're not good at sales. And one day I was like, I just can't believe this. You spent the last 45 minutes selling me how poor you are at sales. Like, aren't you really good at this? Just do it on a different topic.
Turn the conversation around.
Yeah, instead of, hey, I'm not good at sales, like, I'm really good at whatever, and then you'll actually get some deals. So anyways, so those two topics.
Yeah, my thought on especially the sales part is to change the conversation and to begin for yourself figuring out how to take that mind shift to where it's no longer sales. It is genuinely a conversation, because you need something or you don't. So just find out if the other person needs something or not. And if they do, then set up that conversation. I mean, just remove the concept that it's sales and stop worrying about that quite so much, and focus more on the conversations that you're having. I literally spent almost 2 years of my life right after I moved to Austin, and life had kind of fallen apart. It was a big, hairy mess. And I was in a place where I really had to find myself. I was in a lot of pain, and everything fell apart. And I didn't know what it was I was going to do next in my career. I knew that I didn't want to do website design anymore. I knew that I was in a brand new city. And I also was very keenly aware that freelancers can really tend to be looked at as flaky. If they're doing one thing one week, this another week, that, or a month later. So I knew I didn't want to do that either. So although I was still doing website design, and I was in a new city, I didn't want to be known for website design. So I literally spent 2 years going to networking events and telling people I did nothing.
Wow, that's nuts.
And they would like going, oh, that's crazy. How do you do that? I said, maybe coffee sometime, I'll tell you. Just very nonchalant about it. But what do you do? And then they would talk about all the kind of stuff that they do. It's like, oh, wow. And some of it was really cool. Some of it's, mundane. But I had lots of coffee over that couple of years. And when you sit down and have that conversation, the question comes up, you don't really do nothing, right? And I'd say, no, you're right. I don't really do nothing. I still have bills to pay. And so I would kind of tell them about what had happened in my life, where I was, why I was there, and that, yes, I still do website design work, and this is what I do. If you know of anything, love to have it to help me out. I said, but I know that and I would just tell them, I know that that's not what I want to be known for in Austin. And so right now I'm just figuring that out. And until I do, I would be very blunt. I'm not going to tell the world what I do, but I will in intimate conversations like this. And they would be like, that's a great idea. And I would get website design projects. I mean, I would get the work that I needed. And at the end of the 2-ish years, when I finally figured out what it was I was going to do, I had made all these really great relationships. And so that's when I started actually the Austin Freelance Gigs group, and even a genetically unemployable group, just to kind of play with that. And so people were super excited that I was finally finding my feet a little bit and diving into something and being willing to say out loud, I do this. I'm starting a community and I'm figuring this out. And I had a lot of support.
How do you feel about the importance of building that personal relationship in the networking events, or using the networking events to meet people that you build a personal relationship with and then do business? Like, does it have a progression? Do you do business with people that you just met? I guess
sometimes. I mean, sometimes there's, you just have a spark and you're like going, yes, you're my people.
Okay, sure.
And that can happen. So I wouldn't disregard that from happening. Does it happen a lot? No, not so much. But to answer your question, as far as, sometimes, yeah, you meet someone at a networking event, and it's really not possible to have coffee because of what they do or who they are or how they are, whatever. It just, a coffee or another getting together isn't going to happen. Maybe their lives are just so crazy that that's just not possible. But you want to learn more about them, and they would actually like to learn more about you. And so in that particular case, are you coming back to this networking event next month or the month after? So you meet back up at that networking event, and your conversations can build at that networking event. It doesn't have to go to a cup of coffee or coffee cake. Do people eat coffee cake? I don't know. Or a Coke or whatever it is, you bottled wine, whatever it is.
Yeah, coffee is just to like fill in.
It is, yeah. It's at this
for
point.
For some reason, it became, let's get a coffee.
It's becoming the verb or something, but.
Well,
or it could turn into a cup of coffee where you have a conversation. And I've had maybe not quite as many of them, but I've had a lot of cups of coffee that I walked away from and went, okay, I hope they lose my number. It wasn't a good fit. And that's okay too.
Well, I think the networking events it's almost like some kind of a speed dating event, maybe?
They can be. If you had mentioned co-working, if you're a member of a co-working space, maybe that's where your strategic partnerships come from. Maybe that's where these relationships come from. Maybe all of them, maybe just some of them. And, if you're a member of a community, maybe you get one or two out of there. If you absolutely just can't stand networking events, don't go to networking events. Find a different way to do it.
So I actually learned this at your conference, your first conference, which was, I forgot the name of the speaker right now. And I believe the exercise he was describing was that he went to a networking event, or he went to an event, they said, say your name. And he just stood up and he said 924 and then sat back down. And then people
that's right. Yes.
would come, or he would write it down on his shirt or something. I forgot, on the little name tag. But the whole point was to be different enough that people would actually want to. He said, you have no idea how many people approach me to talk, which I thought was just amazing. And accidentally one day I left the name tag on. I went with, I was a chaperone with my daughter at a science project and at SMU. And so I left my name tag on. And twice people approached me because of my name tag. So one time I was sitting down eating with my daughter, and this guy, he's like, hey, Abe, and I don't know him.
Right, you're going, what?
So I look up and he's like, here, some toys or something that they were giving away with the meal. And they're like, here, you can take that at home or whatever. I was like, oh, thanks, man. And then I was sitting at another restaurant, actually ready to eat this time with my wife. She was coming in into Dallas. And so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, a woman sits down beside me. And she goes, "Oh, Abe, is this seat taken?" And I was like, "Man, that's so weird. Like having your name, yeah, having a name tag on is all it takes." So the first one I got, a little present I gave to Isa, but the second one actually was a conversation that happened, and we became friends. And this 30 minutes or 45 minutes, I'm waiting on my wife to drive in from Dallas, and then then she came and said hi to my wife and baby and all that stuff, and just from the name tag though. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was really interesting. So I learned that from your conference, actually, that version of networking.
Awesome.
Right, and the other part is, I think, not looking at a networking event like a speed dating moment. Get to know the other person. Instead of trying to meet 25 people, maybe you can meet 5 people really well.
Yep.
So
maybe
I don't know.
Maybe one.
Maybe one even. And I don't know if that's good or bad, because I know there's different personality types where they'll know everybody in the room by the end of it.
Yeah.
But I personally feel like deeper relationships allow you to build up an understanding of who they are, and build on trust. And I think trust is that grease that business operates on, right?
And it also really increases the opportunity to go to maybe that networking event or another one, and you've built some relationships, and then that person's like going, oh, you have to meet this person.
That's right.
And then even that, what some people feel is just that awful, how do I say, how do I start up a conversation? I've never seen or met you before. And, that's one of the things that I really loved that gentleman did at the first conference too, is he talked about how do you break the ice kind of stuff. And, for me, I just go up and say, I haven't met you before. My name is Emily, and people go going, oh, well, what do you do? I said, what do you do? Or I'll say, I'm looking for cool humans. Are you one? And people will go, maybe. I said, well, try me.
Well, that's so much better than what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. Is this a job interview? right? And of course I never say that out loud, but I'm like, there's got to be a better way for humans to meet each other than what do you do, right? I don't know. I think it's kind of.
And I've asked people, so what do you drink? What do you know? There's a myriad of other questions that you can ask that point you towards a fun and interesting conversation where you get to know one another.
Right. Those are the best ones. When you finally like, so what do you do to make so my question sometimes is like, so what do you do to make a living? What do you do when you're bored?
So what if you changed it to, what do you do that paid for that drink?
There you go. What do you do to pay for that drink? There, that's it, right? Like, how do you make money, right? Like, and then you can hear what they're doing to make money or not making money or whatever their answer is. But I feel it's just so much better than, what do you do? And it's almost like I am listening for a certain thing. Right. And if I don't hear that, I'm going to move on to the next person. Yeah. So when somebody turns around and does it, I'm like, hey, no, this is not going to build because it just starts off wrong. Exactly. In my opinion, it's just like, so going to conferences was so painful for me because I rather build a relationship with people.
I have to tell you this is hilarious. So I went to a networking event one time, and granted it was one I didn't really want to go to in the first place. So I was wearing this, I have a tank top, surprisingly, right? I have this one tank top it has this little symbol thing on the back that I get, it's very yoga-y looking, and it was, the razor back, and it had a very yoga-y looking thing all over it. One of my favorite tank tops. And I wore that with a pair of Crocs again, surprise, surprise, to this networking event. And there was this guy, he had kind of, caught my eye a time or two, vice versa. And so I was aware of him. He's had a, tall guy. And anyway, so I
Are you describing me?
Not. Okay, stop. Anyway, let me finish my story. I promise it's going to get funny here in a second. And so I go to the bar, go to get my drink, and he does. He comes up beside me and he goes, so you're a yoga instructor? And I kind of looked at him because, again, I'd seen him a couple times. I said, and you're a lawyer? And he goes, I am. I said, well, I got it right, but you didn't. And he did. He said, well, so what is it you do? And so I said, you know what? I just kind of spend my life looking for cool humans. Because I could just tell, sometimes you can get it out of inflection or whatever, and maybe it was my bad, but at any rate, that's how I handled that one. And you have to know you. It all really boils down to, you have to know you. And sometimes you just don't go to the event because you're not in the right space. And why waste your time? Your time may be better spent in a hot, bubbly bath. Your time may be better spent picking weeds. You can tell the things I like to do, right? Pulling weeds, or doing some gardening, or going for a bike ride, or sitting down and getting work done.
Yes. How about that one for an idea?
Sometimes that's the best thing you can do for your soul. Sometimes we get so caught up in, I have to take time off. The world tells me that it's got to be in balance, and I have to take my 3 hours. I have to do. No, you don't. I think one of the questions that came up earlier, I did a post, and was work-life balance. How do you do that?
So that was from Dale Cole.
It was, yeah. And I think the answer to that is you just do it. And I know that sounds somewhat trite. It's like, oh, well, that's not helpful. And it is, but it isn't. If you take it to heart, it's really, really helpful. You just do it. Take a note out of Nike's book and just do it. But it boils down to knowing who you are, knowing what you're like. So going back to, my father passing away just a few months ago, after that happened and I finally got home and I was sitting in my space again, you just, I don't know if you've lost a parent yet, but you just feel so empty and lost and kind of dead inside for a while. Everybody kept saying, just take care of yourself, just take care of yourself. And I literally didn't know what that meant. And is it a medicine that you take? What is that? And so I went to Facebook, and I genuinely said, do you remember that?
Yes.
I don't know what self-care means. What is it? What does this mean? This is a genuine question, not asking for judgment. What does it mean? And I had a ton of people, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was quite a ways down, that there was a statement that something along the lines of, what do you like to do that just makes you feel good? I like to pull weeds. And they said, then go pull weeds. No, that's not self-care. And she goes, for you it is. So I can go pull weeds? Yeah, all day long if you want to. It's like,
Is that what led you to start your garden? And
yeah.
okay, that's
This
pretty
is
awesome.
exactly what led me to start my garden.
That one post and that associated answer.
That one question.
Yeah, that question and the answer.
So work-life balance is whatever it is for you. So for me right now, work-life balance is what we were talking about earlier. It is the getting to row 2 or 3 times a week. It is the getting to ride my bike a couple of times a week. It is getting my list that I create on usually Monday for the week. It's getting it done or getting as much of it done as possible. It is, for me, here's my list. It is managing the new stuff that comes in. It is creating X amount of relationships with new potential sponsors, with people that can help make the pull the comforts off, right? So that it actually works without me having to work myself to the bone. It's those things. It's having a weekend. Because Bobby does have a regular job and his weekends are off. That's our time together. Mm-hmm. And so that means that I take weekends off. And a lot of freelancers is like going, Saturday's the same as a Tuesday.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Yeah.
I've lived that life too, but that's not where I'm at right now.
Right.
And so for me, work-life balance works in that I really want to have the majority, if not all, of my Saturday and Sunday to myself.
Why do you think people ask that question? That is such a common question. What do you think the underlying, is it an underlying question that they're not asking, or what's the underlying problem in which this is what the question becomes? Do they feel like they're too stressed all the time, or? It's the most common question I think I would probably, it's the first one that showed up here.
It's definitely up there, and I think I don't think there's one answer for it. I think, a lot of freelancers, they're just working way too many hours. And going back to, we talked about that earlier. Are you working too many hours because you're not charging enough? Are you working because again, whole nother conversation. Do you not believe that you deserve self-care? You can go down that road as well. And I don't know if I believe that way or not, but I think it's very possible that I believe that I just didn't deserve it. I hadn't worked hard enough. I hadn't made I hadn't done everything that I needed to do with my life. And so until I do all that, and you know what? Maybe some of it stems even from the concept of retirement. So how many of us grew up with parents that they work their 30 years and then they get to play. And so you don't get to play until you put in the time. And that is shifting. And the millennials are helping us make that shift. That why do we have to wait till I was 65 to have any fun? And I sort of jumped on that bandwagon pretty early for my generation.
Right, for sure you did.
And then I think there's my generation, maybe some of the ones that are before me, and maybe even the generation between me and the millennials, if there is one in there. I think there's a half a generation where it's like, yeah, guys, you're right. I agree, you don't have to wait till you're 65 to have fun. But there is a responsibility on your part also for some sort of retirement. How do we mesh those two? Again, probably another conversation.
Right.
That I think that we can learn from each other, and begin to remove the it's my way. Nope, it's my way. There's a third answer that we haven't figured out yet. But again, so to get back to the question at hand of why is that probably one of the number one question of freelancers is. It depends.
How much sleep do you get a night on average?
7 to 9 hours.
Awesome.
On average, sometimes I'll have those periods of time where I'm really stressed, or if something's bothering me emotionally, I don't sleep very well. And so, there's times where I don't sleep at all at night. I spend a full 24 hours up, and sometimes I sleep 2 or 3 hours. But for the most part, I really, really do my best to get that at least 7 hours.
I've heard that sleep is like the new status symbol. Did you know that?
That
'Cause
doesn't surprise me.
People are so, I guess going back to that work-life balance, people are so whatever that they're not sleeping. And so if you can say I sleep 7 to 9 hours, like, oh my God, I wish I could be her. Like that is a status symbol. So I think that's really,
all that.
I know, right? Anyways, I think it's phenomenal. That one is really interesting. I don't know what the work-life balance thing is because I try not to do stuff I don't like to do. You know, like I crafted a life after so many years that is what I want it to be. So the work-life balance doesn't make sense to me, that question, and nor does the retirement question, which you alluded to retirement. That was one of my like set questions I like to start asking, like, what does retirement mean to you? Or will you ever retire? What will you do when you retire? Any of those things. So what's your 1 second answer on that one?
I don't know if I'll ever actually retire the way that we have grown to know and I guess love the concept of retirement. That's definitely changing. But once again, having watched my dad go through that last 75, 80 days, he wasn't able to work. I mean, with the cancer and stuff. And so I think I now have a little bit different view of like, wait a minute, we do have a responsibility to make sure that we have a way, whatever that way is, to care for ourselves financially.
Okay.
In those older years. Because there is a chance you could have a stroke. There is a chance, there's things that could happen that you just don't know that you'll have all the faculties that you have today.
Sure.
And I am not a proponent of free health insurance and all that kind of stuff. And so I do believe it is my responsibility to take care of my health. And if something happens to me, that is my responsibility. That's my personal belief.
Shame on you for having your personal beliefs.
I know. Believe me, you're not the first one to tell me something like that. But knowing that, I have to, look ahead. And now that I know I've had two parents that are now gone due to cancer, so the chances are high. So what am I going to do about that?
So yeah.
So some personal responsibility comes into the new concept of retirement.
Absolutely. Really awesome. I know I could talk to you for hours, and we have before, so I think we're at a good place to stop. Yeah, I just love talking to you. So
thank you.
I think you have so much perspective, and you're so authentic and honest about who you are, which I love. And so you're like, I'm like this, you could be like that, which is totally awesome. I'm not going to ever do that, but this is how I am. And you have that way to communicate it, and it's really, really wonderful. So can you tell us about the conference and how people can follow you, about how, follow Emily, the conference?
Well, I'm going to be on I-35 for the next 4 hours. So if you want to follow me, no, just kidding. Although, yes, I will be on I-35. But if you want to follow me, literally, that's where I'll be. I am on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Just, look up Freelance Conference. We're on Instagram, if that's your thing. I am getting turned on to a couple of others, but I'm not going to commit that they're going to stay there. Yeah. These three, I'm okay with. They're there. And of course, we have a website, freelanceconference.com. And the next conference is September 7th, 8th, and 9th. That's really the 8th and 9th. You got a bonus day on the 7th of 2017, right down in Austin, Texas. And we have a great hotel that's right down the street. So right now, tickets are $303. We can shoot you over a discount code if you would like it.
Why not?
So your viewers get a good 20% off. And come down. The conference is industry agnostic, so it doesn't matter what kind of freelancer you are. Our goal is to help you learn business strategy, learn business skills, increase your efficiency, and get work. So we're actually bringing companies that are looking for freelancers to the conference.
Wow.
I would love to see freelancers come to a conference and walk away with a gig. That's what I think would be cool.
So a few things. If $303 is all you have left in the bank, go ahead and spend it with Emily.
Ooh, I like this guy.
And have fun.
I did not pay him to do that.
Just have fun. If you are down to your last $303, that didn't make that big of a difference, might as well. You're already broke anyways. Might as well spend it and have fun. Wait 1 second. But that's an investment. You're actually going to be able to walk away and learn some significant stuff. I learned a lot from the conference.
That's awesome. Thank you.
No, like from pricing to this networking thing, the emotional intelligence speaker.
Mary's coming back and doing a workshop this year. So the year that you came, Mary Holzenbeck, Dr. Mary Holzenbeck, from right here in Dallas, outside of Dallas, she came down and did a talk, and it was the #1 talk at the 2014 Freelance Conference, which is now called FreeCon. They're called both. And this year, she's coming back and doing a 90-minute workshop.
Wow, workshop.
Yes.
Right. So again,
super excited.
Investment. I think that's a big one, and we don't have time to really cover that topic here. But invest in yourself. I have people all the time that are I wanted to get into real estate, but that's a big investment. You're painting, toilets,
money,
all of that. They're willing to do that, but when it comes down to themselves, where it's like, I can't pay someone to go do my grocery shopping, or I can't pay for a maid, but you need to free up all that time so that you can go get other jobs that are going to pay you more, or get to go row, or whatever you got to do.
Just spend time on your business. As freelancers, it's kind of hard to spend time on your business instead of in it. And so we've designed the conference with a co-working space. So if you need to go get a little bit of work done, you can walk out and go to the co-working space. We have business coaching, we have roundtable discussions, we have fireside chat discussions, and we have the 8 workshops, as well as the 8 speakers, and I think 3 interviews.
That's awesome.
That we're doing.
So for those that are watching, if you're listening to this, hop onto the video version of this, and you'll have a list of the workshops. Do you have a list of the workshops?
They're online. They're on the agenda.
Okay, so we'll have those. We'll have the link. We'll have all these like Instagram and Twitter, all the handles. We'll have that both in the description of the podcast, but also in the video. So we'll actually post them at the video. So thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Go get it done, freelancers.
This girl's at Epic Emily. Epic Emily.
Ooh, I like that.
That's good. Epic Emily. There we go. Epic Emily. Thank you.